Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone as we're preparing for Shabbat. Shabbat Parshat Vayeira. Parshat Vayeira is a parsha full, like every other parsha, so many lessons that you can learn. Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Yosef today asked me to look into the Yalkut Shimoni and give a talk about that. B'ezrat Hashem, next year we'll look into that. This year we're going to look at 3 topics as we usually do, and what we can learn from them. So in this week's parasha, we know that Hashem has decided he has to destroy Sodom. Sodom is a terrible city, terrible things are going on, and Hashem wants to destroy Sodom. But Hashem says, I cannot destroy Sodom without first informing Avraham Avinu. And then we know Avraham Avinu prayed for Sodom. They have 50 tzaddikim, 45 tzaddikim, 40 tzaddikim. Yet, what is the reason that Hashem decided to tell Avraham Avinu? What does the pasuk say? Why Hashem decided to tell Avraham Avinu his plans about destroying Sodom? So let's take a look at the pasuk. The pasuk says as follows: Va'Avraham hayo hiye legoy gadol. Avraham is going to turn into a great nation, ve'atzum, and a mighty nation. V'nivruchu vo kol goyei haaretz. And all the nations of the world are going to be blessed through Avraham Avinu. And the pasuk in Torah continues: Ki yid'ativ, because I know him, I cherish him, I love him, and that's why I know him. Lama'an asher yitzaveh et banav et beto aharav. For Avraham Avinu commands his children and his family, his household, after him. V'shameru derech Adonai la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat. He teaches them the way of Hashem to do tzedakah u'mishpat, charity and justice. Laman havi Adonai al Avraham et asher diber alav. And therefore Hashem says, I have to tell Avraham Avinu what's going to go on in Sodom. Because Avraham Avinu teaches his children and his family and they're going to become a great nation, I have to let Avraham Avinu know. The pasuk tells us that Hashem loves Avraham Avinu because he teaches his children. He educates them what to do and how to do it. Right? Like we learn by the Kohanim, it says over there, right? Emor Kohanim b'nei Aharon ve'amarta alehem. It says twice the lashon emor, right? To tell us that you have to teach the children. You have to teach children, teach the adults, so the children would know. But now, here's the question. Gamil Rabinovitz asks this question. He says, "V'yesh l'tama b'ma'alat chinuch hamrab gabe Avraham Avinu." What this is talking about, that Avraham Avinu was teaching his children. Ki dativ l'man asher yitzavet banav. That I know he's going to teach his children. Be'eze banim hakatuv medaber. What children is he talking about? What is Hashem talking about? Which children is he talking about? Halo hefechita shel Sodom kadman l'dato shel Yitzchak shana temimah. Didn't the upside down of Sodom, destroying Sodom, happen a year before Yitzchak Avinu was born? So what children is the parsha talking about? What is the pasuk talking about? The pasuk says, I know that Avraham Avinu is going to teach his children. And that's why I have to tell him everything. Yet at this point, Yitzchak Avinu is not even born. So, what children is he talking about? Because we know that when Hashem says your child, he means from Yitzchak. Ishmael is not counted. So, but Yitzchak's not born yet. And Hashem says, I know he teaches his children. But what children? He doesn't have children. So how can he teach him his children? So listen to what he says here. Someone once came to the Chazon Ish and asked him, what age does it start teaching children? No? So what age does it start teaching children? What age can you start teaching your children? So listen what he says here, the Chazon Ish. Zman mitzvat chinuch madhil 10 shanim lifnei hatuna. 10 years before the wedding, that's when you start teaching your children. So the Chazon Ish says, 10 years before the Hatuna, That's why you start teaching the children. So that means if you're going to get married at 18, you better at 8 years old already start preparing to teach your children. This is Hazon Ish says that something before you start. The Yesod HaDavar, and the concept is, that's Pashut and it's Bara, it's clear, Shemi Sheba'atzmo Enu Mechunach, person who himself is not educated, who's not in the ways of Hashem, Lo, he's not going to be Yachol Lechanech Acherim, he cannot teach other people. The Ikar Tzurat HaChinuch, the main way of teaching a child is through role modeling. Right? You can tell a child from today to tomorrow to do the right thing, but if you're not doing the right thing, right? The famous example in days of past was when someone would call the house phone, right? And then they would say, let me speak to the father. And the father says, tell him I'm not home, right? So then you tell your child, speak the truth. So which one is it? You're telling me to lie, and then you're telling me to say the truth. So it must be the one that you're doing is the right one. And so a person has to be a role model in order to teach his children. That's why the teaching of children starts 10 years before you get married. Like the world says, Timuna ahat shave alpei milim. That one picture is worth 1,000 words. You can talk to the kid today to tomorrow, 1,000 words, but what you're doing is what sticks out. Therefore, the real chinuch starts on yourself. And that's why now it makes sense what the Hazon Ish says. That the main thing is before you already have children. When you have children, it's already too late. Now you cannot start teaching. It's already too late. You have to start before. And that's why our Pasuk says, before Yitzchak was still born, the Pasuk already says, Ki dativ, I already know that Avraham Avinu is going to teach his children the right way. How do we know? Because Avraham Avinu already taught himself. Avraham Avinu already was such a role model that definitely, when he's going to have children, they're definitely going to follow in his footsteps. That's why the Pasuk says, Aharav, after him. What does it mean, after him? Because when you're teaching your children, they look Aharav. They look after you. They look at what you do, how you do it, what you do. Rav Pam says that a person must model behavior for children to do. Rav Shraga Favah Mendelovich Chassidik always would say, children don't learn midot, don't learn character traits, how to behave. Midot are caught, not taught. That was what Shraga Favah used to say. Midot are caught. It's like an infection. You do it, someone has it, pass it on to the next one. That's the way midot, that's the way character, that's the way the child will look. He says, Yechiel Yaakovson says that he was once at a funeral, and they gave the son to speak. And the son was giving a hesped, and he said, in the middle of the hesped, middle of the eulogy, he says, my father enjoyed a good steak. That was my father. So the rabbis, they were a little taken aback. He just said, he's talking a hesped, he's talking about him eating steak, giving a eulogy. And then Rav Yaakovson said, what would my children say about me after 120? What am I role modeling to them? He role modeled them that he liked steak. Steak comes out, on Shabbat, they bring out the manti, start to sing, dance, so the kids understand that the manti is the main thing. You bring out the Divrei Torah, everyone's sleeping halfway, so what's the main thing? So my father, after 120, someone's going to say, my father enjoyed manti, my father enjoyed steak. Person has to look now already to understand how he's being mechanech, how he's educating his children. He has to be a role model. He has to look and understand that what you're doing, that what we are doing, is what they're going to be doing. The Ben Ish Chai says, based on the Tehillim 92, in the Tehillim it says, Tzadik katama yifrach, right? A tzaddik is like a palm tree, like a cedar tree in the Lebanon. He will grow tall. And in the same Tehillim, David HaMelech says that Resha'im are like grass, when the wicked bloom like grass. David HaMelech compares wicked people to grass and compares tzaddikim to trees. What's the difference? The trees, we know, has roots into the ground. It goes far, it goes deep, and it stays strong. What about grass? Grass is right there on the top. When David HaMelech passes away, the Navi says, Shchiva, he went to sleep. He went to lay down with his ancestors. When Yoav ben Surya passed away, it says, Mita, he died. Why? What's the difference? Shchiva, someone passed away, and Mita, someone passed away. The difference is Shchiva means to rest. He was resting because, why is he resting? Because he's not dead. What does it mean he's not dead? He's taking a break. Because now his children are continuing to live like him. So he can rest, and his children are doing it. But if Chas v'Shalom, someone else who didn't teach his children the right way, then he's dead because his children are not continuing in the right way. So the tzaddik is a tree who keeps it strong. And that's how his children can continue to go after him. That's why the pasuk says right before, "Va'Avraham hayo hiyeh legoy gadol ve'atzum." He's going to become a great and mighty nation. The Torah is saying future. Va'Avraham hayo hiyeh legoy gadol. How do we know this? Because he's strong roots that he put into the ground right now. He's like a tree, and everyone who comes into contact with him gets impacted by him. That was Avraham Avinu. That's what it means, aharav, that after him they continued following him. Because he set the example. He was a role model for them. The Sefer Tiferet Banim says, no one could be called Yireh Hashem, no one could be called God-fearing, or a tzaddik, unless he carefully watches over his children. I mean, if you're not carefully watching over your children, you cannot be called a tzaddik, you cannot be called Yireh Shamayim. You see, Avraham Avinu was a Ish Hesed. We know he was a big Baal Hesed. But yet, when the Torah wants to say Hashem loved him, it says that Hashem loved him for one reason. Leman asher yitzaveh et banav et beto acharav. V'shameru derech Hashem la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat. That's why Hashem cherished Avraham Avinu. Because he taught his children. And children look at the parents, look at us, and they role model our behavior. And it's important to understand that. Because what we're doing is setting a very strong example. Rav Gamliel Rabinowitz, Shlita, he brings down a story about a Holocaust survivor. And he says that throughout his whole time, throughout the concentration and the labor camps and everything that he got into, he never once ate non-kosher food. We're talking about a time and place where there was no food to eat, right? But he made sure that he didn't eat non-kosher food. And so when he was talking about this, someone asked him why you had a lot of permission to eat. It's your life or death. So he said, when I was a small boy, my father once got ill. And the doctor said he had to eat something that was not kosher. And when my father got back well, he accepted on himself to fast every Monday and Thursday. That fast that he did every Monday and Thursday made an impression on me that kashrut was very important. And so my whole life, I was extra careful on that. Rav Gamliel Rabinowitz brings another interesting story. He says that a father and a mother from a Hasidic family came crying to him that their son decided that he wants to shave off his beard. Okay, now Hasidic families is a big issue because that's their minhag, how they keep their beards. And so they came crying to him and saying, my son wants to cut his beard off, wants to shave his beard off. So they made an appointment for the son to come and speak to the Rab. And the Rabbi asked him, what's going on? You have a minhag. And the boy says, listen, halachically speaking, there's nothing wrong. I'm going to use the appropriate shaver and everything will be okay. So Rabbi asked him, what about your family's custom? You have minhagim? You have the minhag of your family. And the boy says, minhag of my family? There's a lot of stuff my father doesn't do that his father used to do. So that's what children do. Children see the father doing something else, they take it to another whole step. So his father thought that keeping the beard was important and other things weren't important. So he took some stuff and do the other stuff. So his son decided to do a little more, take away a little more stuff. And Chas Shalom goes so much so that a person, a few generations down, right? Like they say on the night of the Seder, it says we have Arba Banim, but they say there's actually 5 boys there. There's 5 sons. Just one son doesn't even know it's Pesach night. It's so far gone. As the older generations came from Haham to Rasha to Tam Shein Dei Yeshua until one doesn't even come to the table. We have to be very careful. We have our minhagim, we have the Torah, we have halachot. We have to make sure that everything we're doing is correct, 100%. This way, it passes down correctly, and it continues that way. Rav Yaakov Galinsky, he writes that once he befriended a young boy who was from a non-religious family, and the boy eventually started to hang around Rav Yaakov Galinsky and became more and more religious. So much so that he became 100% religious, and his family got very upset, his father and mother. So they sued Rav Galinsky in court, saying that he forced their son to take on religion. And Rav Galinsky was brought to court, and he had to explain his actions. So the judge asked him, knew what happened. So he said, listen, I was just teaching the boy to do exactly what his father did. He says, how do you understand that? His father is Chiloni, his father is secular, and you made him dati, you made him religious. How can you tell him he did it? He says, listen, that boy's grandfather was very, very, very religious. And his father, the son of this grandfather, he went away from religion. He was fighting with his father, right? So now I taught the grandson to do the same thing, to fight with his father and go the other way. So I taught him the same exact thing to do what his father did. We see how important it is to role model, how important it is to understand that the children are watching, and that's the way that they're really learning. And we need to set those roots in right now. The word aharav we've been translating so far as that the child will see what the father does and he's going to follow him. Aharav is going to go after him. In the Peninim on the Torah, he wants to bring another understanding of the word aharav. And he wants to say that aharav means that after the father passes away after 120, that the children will stay with what they're doing, with keeping the Torah and Mitzvot. Sometimes we see in families, the grandfather passes away, the father passes away, and then Chas Shalom, the whole family disappears. No more Torah, no more Mitzvot, no one comes to shul anymore. We've all seen it. It's very tragic. How can we do something to guarantee that our children will keep this, what we're teaching them, role modeling to them, and doing everything that we can, even after we're no longer here, after 120? So the Pasuk says, he wants to learn from the Pasuk, L'ma'an asher yitzaveh et banav, because he commands his children. The Pasuk says, L'ma'an asher yitzaveh, he commands his children. Commands. And it doesn't sound so politically correct. Today we're not supposed to command children, right? Today children will tell you who they are, what they are, when they are, what they're doing. Hashem Shalom. The Torah says it's not the way. Laman asher yitzaveh, we have to command the children to keep the Torah and Mitzvot. Obviously, we're role modeling it too, but we have to give them commands. To me, I understand this being when I was already 11, 12, 13. My father told me the night before, right, every Shabbat, the night before, you're getting up 6 o'clock tomorrow. We're going to the Netz Minyan. There was no, I'm not getting up. There was no, it's not happening. It was not, it's it. That was it. It was it. You had to get up. The father has to set to his children that these are the commands. These are the expectations. You know, I see nowadays, I see boys, bar mitzvah boys, they get bar mitzvah, beautiful, and then I don't see them in shul. They're sleeping at home. Why the father not waking them up? I don't know everyone's family case and what's happening, and it might be good reasons and stuff that are happening, and they're talking to their rabbi and their psychologist, but I'm talking in a general frame. Even if they go to yeshiva. And they're not showing up. And the mother says, don't touch him. And the father says, leave him alone. Bachem Aideh, small, he's going to get older, he's going to understand. He's not going to understand nothing when he gets older. He's going to understand that he did this when he's younger, and he's going to continue to doing that when he's older. You know, Rav Zilberstein writes in the L'ilui that we have to understand that we shouldn't bring small children to shul. Because why? When they come as small children to shul, they're playing around in shul. And then someone tells them, shh, shah, shh, shah. So they get offended, and they think shul is about playing around and having candy. So when they get older, they still think it's about playing around and having candy. You see that some adults in the shul, they can't sit for 5 minutes. They're in, they're out, they're in, they're out. They're always trying to get involved in the kitchen or something else. They can't sit and pray because when they were little, that's what happened. That's what they were doing. So he says the best idea to bring children to shul is to bring them towards the end of prayers. If as older as they get, you bring them a little more, so they can sit and they can learn and how to pray and how to do everything right. So you bring him to shul and the father starts screaming at him. So what do you learn? That they scream at you in shul. So he doesn't want to come. He gets a bad taste of it. I remember my father, my mother used to always tell him, take the kids to shul when we were 7, 8 years old. He didn't take us. He kept us at home. If Shaharit, he never took us. Maybe Mincha, Ravit, on Shabbat, maybe sometimes he would take us. And make sure that we would sit in one place and not move. Right? And then he would reward us afterwards. Candy and stuff like that. But, and then we would see other boys going into shul, running around, everything. But you have to teach children the right way. And there has to be expectation. There has to be command. These are the things that need to happen. And the parents have to understand that they're the primary educators. Meaning, even though we send our kids to school, to yeshivot, to Kut Bet Yaakov, we're still responsible for them. And we have to teach them the right way. And there's no one size fits all, right? Every child is separate. Every child is different. But expectations need to be there. A child needs to know that in this house, in this family, things are done a certain way. And so when he's 100, when the father passes away after 120, the kid knows that I'm still expected to do things. That there's expectation not just from my dad, but from Hashem. And I have to do things. I have to be certain that I'm getting these things done. He brings down here a story, how there was a boy that was giving a hard time to his parents. They run for their money. And it was Erev Pesach, and he got into a huge fight with his father, and he said, I'm leaving. And he walked out. And the whole Erev Pesach, the boy wasn't home. Come Seder night, they want to start, and the boy's still not home. So they send a question to the Stipler going, what should we do? Should we start the Seder or not? And the Stipler going said, wait. Already time is coming, Hatzot, to eat the Afikover, and they still didn't start the Seder. Again, they send a question to the Stipler going, what should we do? He said, wait. About a half hour passed, and suddenly the door opened, and the boy walks in, and he looks down at the table, and he sees nothing moved yet. He says, you guys waited? They said, you're our son. Of course we waited. They didn't apologize to him and say, oh, I'm sorry what we were mean to you. Nothing. You're our son. We love you. We cherish you. There's expectations you have to meet, but you're our son no matter what. He brings another story from Harav Yaakov Yosef Herman. They were big Balei Chesed, and they once took in an orphan boy. And Avram, and they were disciplining him and telling him what he has to do certain things. And he said, how could you be so mean to me? I'm an orphan. You can't do this. And they said, this is the expectation. You have to get these things done. He said, it's not right. I'm leaving. And he goes to his room, starts collecting his things, taking his time, hoping they'll come and beg him to stay. And Rav Herman and his wife didn't say anything. They let him take his stuff. And as he's walking out the door, he's looking to see if the foster parents would come running after him. And Rav Herman walks over to him and says, here's a bag full of cookies. Your mother prepared it for you. So if you get hungry on the way. And here's a couple of dollars for you. And when you're ready to do the right thing, you're always welcome back in the house. All right? Now, we should never have to deal with such teenagers and leaving and things like this. But the idea is there has to be expectations at home. There has to be certain things that are required to happen. It cannot be a free-for-all. All of a sudden, everyone do whatever they want. There's no boss. That is not conducive for anyone. And we see We see this as well from Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, Sarai Imenu tells him, we got to kick out Ishmael. And Avraham Avinu, it says the pasuk, he was very distressed about it. He didn't like the idea. Until Hashem told him, listen to your wife, she knows better, right? So you see, Hashem had to tell Avraham Avinu to listen to his wife. So if your wife says, well, I don't listen to you, you say, Hashem told Avraham to listen to his wife. But Hashem tells me right now, I'm just kidding. But we see that the wife has more connection, and she knows. And Hashem says, listen to Sarah, and Avraham sends him away. But why was Avraham distressed? Why was Avraham distressed that Ishmael has to be sent away? And so they explain that Avraham Avinu, again, this is Gamil Rabbeinu explains, Avraham Avinu looks at every boy. It's his son. It's not a good son, but it's his son. How can I just send him away? There's no such thing as a son, especially in Judaism. Every Jewish boy is very kadosh and very holy. And no one can say, I'm just going to X them off. Torah and mitzvot enough for everybody. You can't expect every boy to do that. No, Shalom, there's no such thing. Torah and mitzvot is given to everyone. Every Jew in Klal Yisrael. And it's for everyone to do. And therefore, Avraham Avinu was distressed because he said, how can I send him away? Hashem had to tell him, it's okay, send him away, it'll be okay. But until that point, we can never give up on any child. So I think we went through a couple of different ideas about how we can be mechanech our children, how can we raise our children, educate them the correct way. Just to briefly review, before we move on to our other topics, which will be much shorter, to briefly review, we talked about being a role model, how it's important to be the role model. Our role modeling is what they do and what they'll see. We talked about creating role modeling and doing things seriously creates roots that will stick around for even longer. We talked about how we have to command and give expectations of what needs to get done, right? And we talked about how we have to love them no matter what, but show them that there's still expectations. And we should never ever give up on any child and say this one is not going to make it. Chas v'shalom. Every child is very holy and very spiritual, and they have the ability to soar to the skies. Let's move on to another idea from the same pasuk. The pasuk says, Ki yid'ativ. And Rashi says, what does it mean, Ki yid'ativ? Ki yid'ativ, for I have cherished him. Lashon hiba. Hashem says, I love Avraham Avinu because he's raising his children to follow me. There was a big tzaddik, Rabbi Leib Friedman. Rabbi Leib Friedman, when he was a young boy of 15, heard that the Hafetz Chaim was coming to Vienna. They were having the Aguda convention in Vienna, and he decided that he wanted to go and visit the Hafetz Chaim. And he was a very poor boy; he didn't have a lot of money, and but he started to collect up penny after penny, and he borrowed money from his friends. And finally, he boarded the train and set out to Vienna. He found where the Hafetz Chaim was staying, and he joined a very long line of people who was trying to get into the Hafetz Chaim's place where he was staying. And he was a very young and small 15-year-old boy. He didn't look like a big guy. And by the time the Hafetz Chaim returned from the first day of the convention, the Gouda convention, there were 100 people gathered outside from everywhere. People from Lithuania, people from Poland, people from everywhere came. And this young boy, Rav Leib Friedman, is also standing in line. He's waiting. He finally comes to his turn to enter. And the guard, the Gaboim standing in the front over there, tell him, no, you can't come in. And they pushed the young 15-year-old boy away. And it started to rain, and Rav Leib Friedman stayed there. He would, from time to time, sit down in the shade beside the door, and he would stay there. And he would stay there for 3 days, trying to get into the Hafetz Chaim. One of the local residents from Vienna saw what was going on every day. He's walking, the boy still standing right in front of the door. And he starts to tell to these guards, you're so mean, you're so cruel. The boy wants to go inside. Let him go inside for a few minutes. What will be? So finally, the Gaboim let him in. And as he's going in, 2 other big men run into the house with him. And these 2 men go over. The Hafetz Chaim was sitting with some bachrim from the Mir Yeshiva. They were talking in Torah. And these 2 men run in and they start saying to Hafetz Chaim, Shalom Aleichem, Rebbe, we've come here to tell you Shalom Aleichem. And Lev Freeman says, Hafetz Chaim looked up to them and said to them straight in their face, can you do something for Torah? They were like, they didn't know what to answer. And all of a sudden the guards came and took these 2 men out. So Lev Freeman is standing there. He says, I started to get tears. I see the Gadol Hador, he's talking in Torah. And all of a sudden he says, I said the bracha, when you're seeing a big tzaddik. And then suddenly the Chafetz Chaim turned to me. He looked at me. He held out his hands and told me to come to him. He took my hands into his hands and started to say, he's one of ours. He's one of ours. And he said he kept my hands in his hands for about a half hour. And he finished talking to everyone and then bid everyone a farewell. Rav Lev Freeman would then say, Rabotai, the Tanat V'Eliyahu says that in the future, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take a Sefer Torah and ask every person in Klal Yisrael, what have you done for the Torah? What did you do to make sure the Torah will not be forgotten in Klal Yisrael? Everyone's going to be asked that question. Not only the Rabbanim, not only the rabbis, not only everybody's going to be asked, what did you do to make sure Torah will not be forgotten? And then if you say you did something, Hashem will turn to the Torah and say, is it true? We'll ask the Torah to testify that what you said you did for the Torah is true. The Hafetz Chaim turned to those 2 men and said, what can you do for Torah? Torah is not to be forgotten. We ourselves have to make sure we don't forget it, and we're supposed to make sure that others will keep it. Avraham Avinu, Hashem says, I love him. Why? Because he's passing the Torah on to his children. That is what we have to do. We have to make sure that the Torah is being passed on to our families, our children, to people that are around us. You know, you look around when people talk, people like to talk about what they like, you know. Like we had about the guy who gave a hesped about his father and said, my father likes steak, right? You go around, some people always talk about sports. Some people always talk about stocks. Some people always talking about real estate. Some people talking about, right? What you really love, that's what you talk about. So what should we be talking about? Torah. That's what we're supposed to really love, right? And then when we talk about it, we're showing others about it. And others are going to get into it. You know, it's always good to have something, a nice cute story about a tzaddik or some midot or something like that, so you can share. Because some people don't understand the intricacies of learning and back and forth. But you're sitting around now, 10 different people, right? You have to have something to talk about. You want to talk a little bit about Torah, so at least they learn a little bit, right? You can also talk about other things. You know, if they like cars, you can talk about cars. You can talk about sports also. But a little bit of Torah, teach them so you can bring them in. Slowly. We have to pass it on. We have to share it with others. Because that's what's going to be the question after 120. What did you do for the Torah to pass it on? You know, I can say, here, I have my YouTube channel. And I have videos on them of Divrei Torah. And people listen to it. I was able to pass it on. Let's go on to one more idea, one more topic from this week's parasha. In this week's parasha, we have Avraham Avinu suffering defeat and Avraham Avinu being victorious. What are these 2 episodes? We have Avraham Avinu. He's praying for Sodom. Was he successful? He was not. And then we have Avraham Avinu at the end of the parasha, where he brings up the Akedah, and he does exactly what Hashem says to do. Put him up, and then not Shech Yitzchak. And Avraham becomes very victorious. He wins. He passes the test, right? Hashem said, please pass the test. This is the foundation of Klal Yisrael. You have to make sure there's a strong foundation. But after both the defeat, where he wasn't able to save Sodom, and when he was victorious after Akedat Yitzchak, the Torah uses a lashon the Torah uses a language that Avraham returned to his place. That Avraham returned to his place. Both by Sodom, where he wasn't able to successfully save them, and although the prayers weren't work for there, we know they work much later on. But yet we see that it says Avraham Avinu returned to his place. Now what does this mean, he returned to his place? For Avraham shav limkomo. Avraham returned to his place. And by the Akedah, it says Avraham returned to the young men that were there, to Eliezer and Ishmael. And then it says right after that, that Avraham Avinu was told, Vayashov Avraham el Na'arav. Avraham Avinu returned to those people there, Eliezer and Ishmael. Then right after that, we're told a story. They tell Avraham, Milcah gave birth, and it was this guy and that guy. The whole family mishpocha who gave birth to who and who until we find out about Rivka. Right? So we have Avraham Avinu suffering defeat and he's returning to his place. We have Avraham Avinu being heroic and victorious and returning to his place, and he's told the story about his family. What's the shot? Why is the Torah telling us he's returning to his place? Where else will he go? Not back home? Where he's going somewhere else now? He's on vacation? What does it mean he returned to his place? What's shot? So in the Parsha parables, Rabbi Mordechai Kamenetsky brings this beautiful story here. There was a Rabbi Abish of Frankfurt, and he was known to be a big anav, very humble person. And he would raise funds for needy families. He once heard that there was a wealthy man on business in his town, and he went to the man's hotel room to ask him for a donation. Now this tycoon, this rich man, was very arrogant. He saw the rabbi standing in front of the door. He thought he's a schnorrer, one of those collectors that go collect. So after a few moments, he kicked him out of the room. He didn't give him anything. A minute later, this rich man comes out of the room, starts screaming that his silver cane is missing. He looks at the rabbi, and he suspects Rabbi Abish of taking his cane. So quickly, the man ran towards the lobby of the hotel. He found Rabbi Abish, started to scream, "Thief, thief!" And he said, "Give me back my cane." Rabbi Abish said, "I didn't take your cane. I didn't steal it." This rich man was adamant, "You took my cane, you came, you tricked me, you took it." And he began to beat the rabbi. He started to really punch him. Rabbi Abish, despite the pain, kept saying, "Please, I didn't steal, I didn't steal. He says, "Please give it back to me." He's beating him up. He sees the rabbi saying nothing, so he says, "You know what? Go. You stole it, get away from me." That Shabbat, right, that week it was Shabbat Shuvah. The entire community, including the wealthy visitor from out of town, packed Frankfurt's main synagogue. Everyone came to the main shul for the traditional Shabbat Shuvah speech. All of a sudden, horror gripped this rich man as he looks and he sees standing on the podium to give the Shabbat Shuvah Drasha is the man he accused of stealing his cane and the man that he beat up. As soon as the speech ended, this rich man pushes his way towards the podium. With tears in his eyes, he wants to get the rabbi's attention to apologize. He's about to ask for forgiveness when Rabbi Abish notices him. And Rabbi Abish tells him, "Please, I told you before, I didn't steal it. I beg you, don't beat me up. And please, I didn't take your cane." Rabbi Abish didn't say to himself, I gave a big speech. Now he knows who I am. Now I'm going to demand him to say I'm sorry. He didn't go and, when I'm saying Bukhari and Bini Bola, he didn't make his nose now up high. All of a sudden I did something great. Or he didn't get depressed. Avraham Avinu is teaching us this lesson. That how to be an anav, how to be a humble person. When something doesn't go right, we prayed for Sodom, it didn't happen. We don't get dejected and depressed. I prayed it didn't work out. Now cry away and be upset for the rest of the day, for the rest of the year. Hashem. Shalom, come on. I went back to my place. I'm continuing my service in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when he was victorious, and he won, and he did Akedat Yitzchak, and he was Zochet to how much Zechutim, till today we exist under Zechutim of Akedat Yitzchak. Avinu didn't say now, look at me, I'm so great, I'm so big. Vishav, he came back to his Na'arav, to Ishmael and Eliezer. He heard stories about the Mishpacha, family stories. This one gave birth. He didn't say, that's beneath me now, Shalom. He came back to his place. And continuing to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he took the lessons with him that he did in the Zechutim, but he didn't let it change him in his character. Continued to do Hesed. Continued to take people off the street and help wash their feet, give them food, give them drink. He didn't say, I'm too above this. This is not for me anymore, Hashalom. He kept it, and he kept it as is. And I think that's another lesson that we can learn from this week's parasha. So, to sum it up, we had a couple lessons on how to educate and raise and role model for our children. We had the idea that how important it is to make sure that we're doing something to make sure that we're continuing the Torah in Klal Yisrael. And we brought the last concept of how it's so important to not let dejections, bad things that happen to us, or very good things that happen to us, change our character and the way we deal with the people and the world. We should stay and remain like Abraham Avinu, people of Hesed, people who are looking to do good things, people who are looking to help out. That's our job in this world. It's just as Hashem created the world to benefit mankind, our job is to emulate Hashem and to help benefit our family and our friends. And with this, I would like to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom.